In the distant corners of the galaxy, where stars glitter like distant dreams, Zira, an alien princess, stood alone in the cold silence of her chamber. The once glorious kingdom she had ruled was now reduced to ashes. Betrayed by her own people and abandoned by those she had trusted, she had become a shadow of the fierce leader she once was. Her heart, once filled with the strength of her heritage, now lay buried beneath layers of grief, doubt, and hopelessness. Her people had turned their backs on her, their queen, the one who had fought to protect them. They believed her to be weak, after a failed war, and they abandoned her without hesitation. Zira had always prided herself on her resolve, her ability to stand tall in the face of adversity. But now, as the weight of the loss pressed down on her, she felt smaller than ever. Before, she was no longer the princess of her people. She was just a forgotten relic of a lost kingdom. The walls of her chamber, once filled with the laughter of her people and the grandeur of royal life, now felt like prison bars, trapping her in a reality that she didn't know how to escape. She had no one left. There was no one to console her, no one to remind her of her strength. Only silence and the distant hum of the spaceship that had once been a symbol of her kingdom's greatness. Zira sat at the edge of her bed, staring out into the vast emptiness of space. The stars twinkled in the distance, cold and distant, much like her heart. Her hands trembled as she traced the outline of the crown that had once been hers. The weight of it now seemed too much to bear, and she had no desire to wear it ever again. What did it matter? A crown meant nothing if you had no people to rule, no kingdom to protect. As the hours passed, Zira's mind wandered to the past. She remembered the day she was crowned, the cheers, the celebrations, the promises she had made to her people. She had vowed to protect them, to lead them to a brighter future. But in the end, it was all a lie. A lie she had been too naive to see. The very people she had protected were the ones who had cast her aside when things went wrong. The tears that Zira had long since stopped shedding began to fall once more. She wiped them away hastily, not wanting to acknowledge her weakness. But she couldn't stop the flood of emotions that overwhelmed her. She was angry. Angry at her people. Angry at herself for trusting them. But beneath that anger was a deep, aching loneliness. The kind of loneliness that no one could truly understand unless they had lost everything. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime at the door of her chamber. Zira looked up in surprise. Who would be calling on her now? She hadn't seen anyone for days, weeks, maybe even longer. She didn't want to face anyone, especially not after everything that had happened. "Zira, it's me," a familiar voice called from outside. "Please let me in." It was Ethan. The name hit her like a sudden shock. Ethan, the human who had arrived on her planet weeks ago, a medic sent to help the wounded from the war. She had barely spoken to him during his stay, too consumed by her own despair to care about the humans in her care. But there was something different about Ethan. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't here to take advantage of her vulnerability, or to make her feel smaller than she already did. Ethan had been kind to her, in a way no one else had, but kindness was something she wasn't sure she could accept anymore. Zira hesitated, then slowly stood from the bed, her legs trembling beneath her. She had no idea what he wanted, but the thought of facing him filled her with a mixture of anger and something else, something softer, something she had long ago buried. She approached the door and opened it just enough to peek out, meeting his eyes for the first time in what felt like forever. Ethan stood there, his face warm and concerned, but his expression was gentle, as though he could sense the heaviness in her heart. I know you don't want to see anyone right now," he said, his voice quiet. "But I wanted to check on you. You've been in here for days, and I want you to know that you're not alone. If you need anything at all, I'm here." Zira could feel the wall she had built around herself start to crack. She had wanted nothing more than to push everyone away, to isolate herself in her pain. But Ethan's sincerity caught her off guard. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she didn't feel completely alone. I don't want your pity, Ethan, she replied, her voice cold, but the tremor in it betrayed her. No one can help me. I've lost everything. Ethan didn't flinch at her words. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence warm and steady. I'm not here to pity you, Zira. I'm here to be your ally. I know you've been through more than most, but you don't have to face this alone. I don't expect you to trust me right away, but I'm not leaving. Not until you see that there's still hope. Hope. The word echoed in Zira's mind. Hope was a foreign concept now. It had been shattered like everything else she had once believed in. But something in Ethan's words stirred a faint flicker of that long-forgotten feeling within her chest. Could there still be hope for her people? Was it possible that someone, even a human, could help her rebuild her future? Zira looked away, unable to meet his gaze any longer. She didn't want to believe him. She didn't want to trust anyone ever again. But as she stood there in the silence between them, she realized that, for the first time in a long while, she didn't want to be alone anymore. Please, stay, she whispered, the words barely audible. Ethan smiled softly, his eyes full of understanding. I'm not going anywhere. And just like that, the first crack in the walls Zira had built around herself began to widen, leaving room for the faintest spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this human could be the one to show her that even in the darkest of times, there was always a chance for redemption, for healing, and for the possibility of a future worth fighting for. The days following their first real conversation felt like a dream to Zira. She wasn't used to letting anyone into her world, and yet Ethan, a human, had managed to break through the walls she had spent so long building. Her heart, once closed off and hardened by the betrayal of her people, now felt a slight stir of something she hadn't felt in years. Was it trust? Or was it merely the illusion of hope? Zira found herself watching him more closely, studying his every action. His sincerity was overwhelming, and she began to notice small gestures, the way he always made sure she was comfortable, the way he asked about her well-being without any hidden agenda. But how could she trust him completely? Humans were known for their kindness, but they were also creatures of self-interest. Was Ethan truly different? Or was he just like the others who had betrayed her? The hours she spent with Ethan became the only time she could let her guard down, even if just for a moment. They would talk about the simple things, his experiences as a medic, her childhood memories of her home planet. But even these conversations, innocent as they were, felt strange to Zira. She had never allowed herself to be so vulnerable, to reveal so much of her true self. The walls were slowly coming down, but her fear of being hurt again held her back from letting Ethan too close. One afternoon, Ethan approached Zira with a gentle smile on his face. He had been working on some equipment in the nearby lab, but he seemed unusually quiet. His eyes filled with thought. As he stood in front of her, Zira couldn't help but notice the flicker of uncertainty in his gaze. There was something different about him today, something that made her anxious. Zira, I know it's been difficult for you to trust anyone. Ethan began, his voice soft but firm. But I've been thinking, there are things you don't have to face alone. I know you're afraid of being hurt again, and I get that. But trust is the only way forward. If you'll let me, I want to help you rebuild. Zira's heart skipped a beat. She had never heard him speak with such seriousness, such conviction. She had been hoping for this moment, hoping for him to say exactly what he just had. But now that it had come, she wasn't sure if she was ready. Was she ready to take that step, to trust again? Could she risk opening herself up to the possibility of pain once more? I don't know how to trust you, Ethan, Zira whispered, her voice trembling. She looked away, unable to meet his gaze. Every time I let someone in, they end up leaving, or worse, betraying me. How do you expect me to believe that you won't do the same? Ethan took a step closer, his eyes filled with understanding. I can't promise that everything will be easy. Trust isn't something that happens overnight. It takes time, and I'm willing to give you that. But I can promise you this, I'm not going anywhere. I'm here to stay, and I'll prove to you every single day that you can count on me. His words hit her like a wave, and for a moment Zira felt herself falter. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him more than anything. But how could she be so sure? How could she risk the only thing she had left? Her heart? Her hesitation did not go unnoticed. Ethan reached out, gently touching her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. It wasn't a grand gesture, but to Zira, it was enough. For a moment they stood there, the silence between them speaking volumes. In that brief pause, Zira allowed herself to breathe, allowed herself to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, this time could be different. But there was still a lingering doubt in her mind. A lingering fear that kept her from fully letting go. Trust wasn't just about believing in someone else. It was about believing in herself again, too. Could she be strong enough to risk trusting him? Could she risk her heart once more, knowing that it might be shattered again? The next few days became a test of that trust. Ethan continued to stay by her side, helping her with various tasks, both physical and emotional. He never once pushed her to open up before she was ready, never demanded anything of her. But with each passing moment, Zira could feel something shifting within her. The fear that had once gripped her tightly was loosening its hold, and with it, her heart was beginning to soften. But just as she felt herself starting to trust Ethan, the world outside her chamber suddenly changed. A distress signal was received. A message from the remnants of her people, those who had once abandoned her. They were under attack by a powerful enemy force, and the plea for help was desperate. Zira's mind raced. Could she help them? Should she help them? These were the very people who had turned their backs on her. They had left her to die. Ethan, sensing her conflict, turned to her. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to," he said quietly, his eyes searching hers. "You've been through so much already. But if you decide to help them, I'll be by your side no matter what." Zira stood frozen, torn between her desire for revenge, her need for justice, and the lingering hope that her people could be redeemed. The weight of the decision felt almost too much to bear. She had been betrayed before by those she loved, and now she had the power to either save or abandon them once more. The pressure was unbearable, and for a moment she wanted to run away, to hide from it all. But then she realized something. She wasn't alone anymore. Ethan was right there beside her, offering her the support she had long since stopped believing in. This wasn't just about saving her people or seeking revenge. This was about her own redemption, her own growth. She had to make the decision herself, but she didn't have to do it alone. As the day passed, Zira made her choice. She would go to her people, but this time she would go not as a broken princess, but as a leader who had found the strength to trust again. With Ethan by her side, she would face her past and her future, knowing that no matter what happened, she had someone who truly believed in her. The test of trust had begun, and Zira was ready to face it, no matter where it would lead. The days after Zira's decision to trust Ethan had been filled with small, subtle changes. Her heart, once encased in layers of ice, began to thaw just a little. She found herself smiling more often, and her conversations with Ethan grew longer, deeper. Slowly, she began to see him not just as a human who had stepped into her life by chance, but as someone who genuinely cared for her, a friend, an ally, and perhaps one day something more. But just as things seemed to be falling into place, the calm that had settled over them shattered in an instant. It started with a low hum from the control room, followed by a sharp, insistent alarm that cut through the air like a knife. Zira's heart skipped a beat. She had heard that sound before, the unmistakable sound of danger. In the distance, faint voices over the intercom could be heard, growing more frantic as the moments passed. Ethan had been working on the ship's medical supplies when the alarm went off, and he rushed to Zira's side. He could see the worry in her eyes even before she spoke. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice tight with fear. "It's the council," Ethan said grimly, scanning the control console. "They've found us. They're sending a fleet to attack. Zira's blood ran cold. The very people who had once betrayed her, who had abandoned her to her fate, were now closing in for the kill. She had thought they might leave her to live out her days in peace, but it seemed the council had other plans. She felt the weight of her past crash into her all at once. The loss of her kingdom, the betrayal of those she had trusted, and now, the reality that she would have to face them again. This time not as a helpless princess, but as someone who had something to fight for. "Are we ready?" Zira asked, her voice steady, though the knot of fear in her stomach was unmistakable. Ethan turned to her, his face filled with urgency and concern. "Not yet. We need more time to prepare, but I don't know if we have that time." The ship's systems flickered, and the view from the cockpit revealed the fleet of enemy ships drawing closer. They had no more time for preparation. The crisis had come, and there was no avoiding it. Zira's chest tightened. This was the moment she had feared, a moment where the past would collide with the present, and the decision to face her past would either break her or make her stronger. "Zira," Ethan said, his voice quiet but firm, "you don't have to do this. We can leave, we can escape and go somewhere else where they can't find us." Zira looked at him, her heart filled with conflicting emotions. She had considered running, leaving everything behind, but the thought of leaving the remnants of her kingdom, the people she had once sworn to protect, and even herself, was impossible. They had betrayed her, yes, but they were still her people. She had to do something, even if it meant facing her greatest fear. "I can't run anymore," Zira said softly, her voice shaking slightly. "They've taken everything from me. My people, my trust. But I won't let them take my future too. I have to face them." Ethan looked at her, his expression softening. "Then I'm with you every step of the way." A sudden explosion rocked the ship, sending both of them stumbling. The room around them spun as the shockwave reverberated through the hull. They had been hit. Zira's eyes widened in horror as the lights flickered, and the ship's systems began to malfunction. Sparks flew from the control panel, and the sound of sirens and alarms filled the air. The ship was under attack. "Get to the control room," Ethan shouted, grabbing Zira by the arm. "We need to steer the ship out of danger." They rushed down the narrow corridors of the ship, the sound of metal creaking and groaning around them. The ship was taking hits from all sides, and every moment brought them closer to the inevitable, the final confrontation with the council. As they entered the control room, Zira's gaze went to the view screen. The enemy fleet was closing in rapidly. There were at least 10 ships, each one armed with weapons that could tear their vessel apart in seconds. "Shields at 20%, Ethan reported, his fingers flying over the controls. "We won't last much longer." Zira stepped forward, her heart racing. She had no more time for hesitation, no more time for second-guessing herself. This was it. She had made her decision. Now she had to face the consequences. "Take us into the heart of their fleet," she commanded. "We'll fight back." Ethan looked at her in disbelief. "Are you sure? If we do that, we don't have a choice," Zira interrupted, her voice strong. "This is the only way. We either fight or we die." Ethan hesitated for a moment before nodding. "All right, let's do it." With a deep breath, Zira settled into the chair next to Ethan, her hands gripping the armrests. The ship jolted as Ethan punched in the command to accelerate. They shot forward into the heart of the enemy fleet, their ship weaving through a maze of enemy fire and debris. Zira's mind raced, the adrenaline coursing through her veins as she braced for what was coming. A moment later, another explosion rocked the ship, and the control panel in front of them flashed red. They had taken another hit, but they were too deep in the enemy fleet now. There was no turning back. The time for running was over. Zira was ready to fight, to prove to herself, to Ethan, and to her people that she was no longer the frightened princess they had abandoned. She was a warrior, and this was her moment. With a steady hand, Zira gripped the weapon control. She knew what had to be done. She aimed, her heart beating loudly in her chest. In this moment of crisis, everything had changed. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for redemption. and as she pulled the trigger, sending a blast of energy straight into the enemy's lead ship, she knew that no matter what happened next, she had taken the first step toward reclaiming her future. The battle was raging, the sound of explosions and the flash of enemy fire filling the air. Zira and Ethan had maneuvered their ship deep into the heart of the enemy fleet, determined to take down the council that had abandoned her, the people who had taken everything from her. There was no turning back now. The stakes had never been higher. For the first time in years, Zira felt a fire burning within her, a resolve to fight for her future and for those who had stood by her. They were surrounded, enemy ships on every side, their weapons primed and ready to strike. The ship's hull groaned under the pressure, the shields flickering dangerously low. Ethan's hands moved quickly across the controls, trying to keep them intact as they weaved through the oncoming fire. "Shields are at 5%. Ethan shouted over the din. "We need to get out of here, Zira. We're not going to make it if we stay in the middle of this." Zira's heart was pounding in her chest, but her mind was clear. She had come too far to back down now. The fate of her people, her kingdom, and even her own future hung in the balance. The council had thought they could break her, thought they could crush her, but they had underestimated her, and they had underestimated the strength of the bond between her and Ethan. "No," Zira replied, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We fight, we finish this." She could see the enemy leader's ship in the distance, the massive flagship of the council's fleet. It was heavily fortified, brimming with weapons, and well protected by its defenses. But Zira knew this was their only chance. She had one last shot at ending this, one final chance to prove to herself and to her people that she was more than the broken princess they had abandoned. Ethan looked at her, uncertainty clouding his eyes, but he didn't question her decision. Instead, he nodded and pushed the ship forward, steering them directly toward the flagship. As they approached, Zira took a deep breath, gripping the controls. Her eyes locked onto the enemy ship, her mind focused entirely on the task at hand. She had nothing to lose anymore. This was the moment where everything changed. Either they would destroy the council, or they would be destroyed. "Hold on," Ethan warned as the ship jolted from incoming fire. But Zira remained calm, her hands steady on the weapons control. She fired back, sending laser blasts that hit their targets with precise accuracy, weakening the shields of the flagship. But just as she thought they might have a chance, disaster struck. A massive explosion rocked their ship, throwing both of them to the ground. Zira's vision blurred as the room spun around her. She struggled to stay conscious, but the pain was overwhelming. Ethan was beside her, his hand gripping her arm. "Zira, are you okay?" he shouted, his voice strained with concern. "I'm fine," she gasped, struggling to sit up. But as she did, she saw the damage. The ship's hull had been breached, and the internal systems were failing. They had only moments before the entire vessel would implode. Her heart sank as she realized what had to be done. There was no way to escape now, no way to save the ship or get away from the enemy. But there was one final action she could take, one final sacrifice that could destroy the council's fleet and give her people the chance to rebuild. Zira turned to Ethan, her eyes filled with determination. "Ethan, I need you to get to the escape pod. You have to survive. You have to take the people who are still alive and get away from here." Ethan looked at her, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. "No, we can make it out of here together. There's still time. I won't leave you." Zira's expression softened, but her voice was firm. "There's no time left for us, but there is for you. You can still lead them. You can still save everyone else, don't you understand? I'm the only one who can end this. If I don't act now, we'll all die here." Ethan shook his head, trying to grasp the reality of the situation. "I can't leave you. You're not just a princess anymore, Zira. You're everything to me." Tears filled her eyes, but she pushed them aside, her hands trembling as she reached for the control panel. "You have to. I need you to promise me." For a moment, Ethan didn't speak, the weight of the decision hanging heavy between them. But then, with a quiet sigh, he nodded, his voice breaking. "I promise." Zira smiled weakly, her heart heavy with the decision she was about to make. "Thank you, Ethan. I love you. But this is the only way." Ethan kissed her forehead, the warmth of his lips a final comfort before he reluctantly headed toward the escape pod. Zira's eyes never left him as he made his way to safety. She watched him disappear into the pod, and as the hatch sealed, she knew that she was making the ultimate sacrifice, one that would ensure his survival and the survival of her people. With a deep breath, Zira activated the self-destruct sequence, setting the ship's engines to overload. The countdown began and she turned to face the viewscreen one last time. The Council's flagship loomed before her, vulnerable but still dangerous. She locked onto the main weapon systems and fired, sending a powerful burst of energy into the heart of the enemy ship. The blast was devastating. The flagship exploded in a brilliant burst of light, and the enemy fleet began to break apart. Zira closed her eyes, feeling the immense wave of energy wash over her. She had done it. The Council was gone. Her people had a chance. And in that final, beautiful moment, Zira knew that she had given everything for what truly mattered. Her future, her people, and the love she had found with Ethan. The ship's systems began to collapse around her, but the smile on her face remained. She had done what needed to be done. As the ship disintegrated in the flames, she could feel her heart at peace. Zira had faced her greatest fear, betrayal, loneliness, and loss, and, in the end, she had risen from it all. She had not only saved her people but had also found redemption in her final act of sacrifice. Her journey had come to an end, but her legacy would live on, not in the ruins of her kingdom, but in the hearts of those who had been given a new beginning. And as the light faded, she knew her story was only just beginning, one of hope, sacrifice, and the ultimate victory over despair.